You're listening to episode number 45 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. Now, in this episode, I'm going to talk about why it's so hard to break your bad habits. Now, you may or may not know that episode number 5 is also about habits, but in this episode, I want to give you the exact strategy that I reference in episode number 5, and it's the strategy that I used to kick a 20-year Diet Coke habit. And I'm going to give that strategy to you step by step in this episode. So keep listening. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so as you may or may not know, I've already created a podcast on habits, episode number 5, that I told you about in the introduction. Now, in that episode, I told you, and I don't know, how new, you've been with me or how long you've been with me. And I want to suggest also, let me segue here. If you're new here, go all the way back to the beginning and start there. Start with episode number 1, because they don't necessarily build on each other, but yet they complement each other. So if you're new here, go back to episode number 1. However, you may want to start with episode number 5, because I told you in that episode, I'm going to teach you the exact process that I learned, that I tweaked, that I figured out, and I used that psychological process. I call it a strategy. I used that very simple 4-step strategy to literally eliminate a 20-year-old Diet Coke habit that I had, and that was many years back that I did it. Now, about Diet Coke, you can use that, but you can substitute your own habit, whatever it might be, and just substitute Diet Coke as I tell you the stories. Because in the process I'm going to give you, it has nothing, it has nothing to do with Diet Coke. So just substitute whatever bad habit, sabotaging habit, counterproductive habit, substitute whatever habit it is that you want to replace, but I'm going to give you the exact processes and steps. And again, they are like really simple. A third grader could do it. It is so simple. Before I do that, just being transparent with you here, before I actually created this episode, I've hired a video marketing company, and I've shot a year worth of video content. And one of the videos, which we're going to use YouTube, one of the videos was on habits. So, as I sat down to create this episode for you, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And, episode number 5 is very in depth. And I cover a lot in that episode. So I don't want to just sit here and rehash episode number 5. So what I'm going to share with you is, and it would serve you well anyway, if you've been with me for a while. Go back and listen to episode number 5. And you can do it, you can stop here and go back right now and then come back. Or you can finish this episode and then go back to number 5. But it will serve you well to go back and listen to number 5. And the reason why is research also demonstrates that, and by the way, I think it's episode number 5. I didn't go look, but I'm pretty sure it's number 5. So anyway, research demonstrates that we forget 89% of what we hear and even what we air quote learn within 30 days if it's not reinforced. And I've gotten many emails from people and Instagram notes and everything else. And by the way, I've mentioned before, if you have a question you want me to answer on the podcast, please do not send it to my personal Instagram, because it's probably going to get missed. And I definitely want to at least get your question on the list. But research demonstrates that we literally forget, 89% of what we learn within 30 days if it's not reinforced. So go back to episode number 5. Now, what I do want to do is I do want to recap episode number 5 before I give you the 4-step strategy sequence to break any bad habit. Also, I want to point out that I talk about in episode number 5, there are no such things as good habits or bad habits. The brain just knows habits. The reptilian part of the brain does not know what a good habit is or a bad habit is per se. It just actually works from habits. I do want to recap a little bit of episode 5, so there will be a little bit of overlap, but not much. So, episode number 5, I talk about the research done at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, one of the foremost research institutes in the world. What they discovered is that 95% of everything that we do on a daily basis, everything that we do is brain-based, it's habit-based. And we go through our entire days on automatic autopilot. As a matter of fact, we go through most of our days on brain-based automatic autopilot or on unconscious autopilot. Something else that I talked about in that episode, and I want to reinforce it. Maybe you'll hear it in a different way this time. And I also know from people going through my training programs, when many people repeat the programs multiple times, and they grow in the programs, and they will say, you know what, when you talked about XYZ in the last program, I didn't even hear you. Well, the reason why is because the brain filters it out. So by going back and listening to episode number 5, if you've been listening since, since number 5, you will hear a lot of stuff that you did not hear the first time through. But I did say in that episode, and this is so simple. And by the way, I'm not tossing any stones because everything I'm sharing with you, I'm in Earth School also, and these are things that, I've had to apply in my own life and master and work with and struggle with and triumph over. And, we're no different. We're all just on different paths in this lifetime. But I said in that episode, and maybe me saying it this time, you might hear it a different way, but everything in life, considering the fact, the scientific research that 95% of your day is on autopilot, everything is about training yourself. Consider that. Everything is about training yourself. And you do what you do because you have trained yourself or other people have trained you in those habits. And you do not do what you do not do because you don't have the habit and you have trained yourself or other people have trained you. Recently, in my transformational coaching program, somebody had asked me a very simple question. They said, Jim, why do I keep falling back into my old patterns again? Well, that's a really simple answer. Simple. I mean, like mega simple. It's just habits. That's why this, in my interpretation, the episodes on habits are, I believe, some of the most powerful episodes that I will create for you because your life literally is an amalgamation of your habits. You might have heard me say before that you don't get in life what you want because that is left brain analytical thought. You get in life what your habits are. Let me explain here very quickly, even though I talk about it in episode number 5. We'll talk about habits in 3 parts of the brain. You've got the oldest part of the brain, we all have, which is the reptilian brain. The function of that part of the brain is survival, fight, or flight. Then you have the middle brain, which is called the mammalian brain, which is also the limbic system, and it's the emotional part of the brain. And then you have what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is the largest part of the brain. It's the part of the brain listening now saying, yes, this makes sense, I get it, turn left at this light, what am I going to have for dinner tonight, etc., etc. It is the thinking part of the brain. Now, what happens is that people have the thought, I want to change XYZ about myself, which comes from the actually prefrontal cortex, the thinking, the executive part of the brain. Things like, you know what, I really look fat in these pants. Or, a guy could say, I don't really look that good. Summer's here and I don't look that good taking my shirt off at a pool party, so I'm going to diet, I'm going to run, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to go to the gym, whatever. So we have this thinking part of the brain that actually thinks that we want to change certain habits. And many times we attribute it to mindset, saying that we want to change our mindset. But anytime anyone says they want to change their mindset, what they're really saying is they want to change their habit. And what they really mean without knowing it, and with what I teach people, is they want to change their brain set. They want to change their habits. So the reason it's so hard for most of us is that the analytical thinking brain says, you know what, and I've been there, and I'm going to use my example from many years ago. You know what, I've read these articles, Diet Coke is not good for you. I used to have 1 a day, sometimes 2 a day, but generally I rationalized it and said I would drink Diet Coke after lunch because I don't drink coffee, which is what we do. We rationalize our behaviors. Being a hypnotist for many years, women would say, well, I eat because I'm lonely. I eat because I'm bored. I eat because of this or that. I eat because I'm sad. And men say it too, but I worked with a lot of women. And we eat because we eat, plain and simple. But what we do as humans is we rationalize it. So I would drink the Diet Coke and rationalize it. But years ago, I thought, you know what? I read some stuff on what's it called, aspartame or whatever it's called, the artificial sweetener, and it's not good for you, and a higher incidence of stroke and diabetes and heart attacks and all this kind of stuff. But yet, I felt like I air quote was addicted to Diet Coke. I'd even tell people, I would say things like, you know what? I don't know what, I don't know what they put in this, but holy cow, this stuff is addictive. Now, that could also be a story in itself, which actually perpetuated the habit. I do not know. I mean, I could have been addicted because I, again, air quote, thought that I was addicted to Diet Coke. And in episode 5, I told you that I'm going to show you a 4-step sequence to literally bust any negative, counterproductive, sabotaging habit very, very quickly. I've used it myself to stop drinking Diet Coke, which I drank 1, maybe 2 a day for 20 years. And I did it in the same sequence, the same time, which is also habitual. But I'm going to share with you the 4 simple steps at the end of this episode. So what happens is the reptilian part of the brain, the oldest part of the brain where habits reside. Let me explain here. Let me go back here. So we have the prefrontal cortex thinking part of the brain saying no Diet Coke. But Diet Coke for me was a habit, and the reptilian part of the brain is responsible for habits. So what would happen is I would set them up for a battle. My thinking part of the brain, no Diet Coke, would battle the reptilian part of the brain, yes, Diet Coke is a habit. And then I got into what I would call a habit battle. Have the Coke, don't have the Coke. Have the Coke, don't have the Coke. Have the Coke. Oh, my willpower is wearing down, which I explained in episode number 5. My willpower is wearing down. Okay, I will have the Diet Coke. Therefore, I'm reinforcing the belief that, you know what, Diet Coke is addictive and I cannot stop Diet Coke. And the cycle of negativity in terms of meaning the Diet Coke habit continues on and on and on. Also, which I talk about in episode number 5, is willpower does not work. Many people think that willpower is trying to make something happen. And there's different wills. We can use our willpower. We can use our will as a human being, which is a whole different episode. And then do not confuse that with willpower, which people think is strength of mind. Well, willpower does not work, and you have many episodes in your own life. And when you look at your own life, you will find many times when you've tried to use willpower, it has become an amazing, amazing struggle for you. And go back and listen to episode number 5, and I will explain why willpower does not work. And actually, willpower reinforces the habit and makes it even harder to quit. The very simple explanation is because if you're thinking about, and by the way, the unconscious mind is not thinking negatives. To give you an example, if I said, don't think of a pink elephant, you have to think of a pink elephant to know what I do not want you to think about. Now, when people are thinking about, for example, trying to use willpower to stop drinking coffee or Diet Coke or sugar or whatever it is, when you're using your willpower, where's your attention? Your attention is on not doing a behavior. And if you're thinking about not doing a behavior, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about the behavior. Hence, you're actually making the behavior harder to stop. Okay, something else I want to explain here. A few more things. Let me go a few more minutes, and then I'll give you the 4-step process. So the reptilian part of the brain, the oldest part of the brain, where it works from is that every habit that you have, because the reptilian part of the brain is responsible for the autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, keeping you alive, and this is where our habits are housed in that part of the brain. Now, the reason that we create habits is for the brain to conserve energy and to save energy. It's also a survival mechanism. What I tell people is, imagine for a moment if you had to actually learn how to ride a bike or drive a car or wash dishes or get dressed, you had to learn how to do it. Every time you did it, I mean, your life would be one continuous learning cycle of learning how to wash dishes or drive the car or whatever. But we learn these things, and the brain learns these things for efficiency reasons, to conserve energy. So the reptilian part of the brain works from every habit that you have is necessary for your survival. Now, when the analytical brain thinks about it, the prefrontal cortex, you're like, well, that's ludicrous. I mean, smoking, I don't want to smoke anymore, and I don't want to drink Diet Coke, and I don't want coffee, and all these things that many of us do. Some people here listening also are going to say, well, a lot of these things are physically addictive. I'm going to tell you right now, that is not true. I thought Diet Coke was addictive. It was not true. I dropped it literally in a matter of an hour or minutes, which I'll teach you how to do. People will say, well, smoking's addictive. Well, if that's true, then how come being a hypnotist for many, many years, a master hypnotist, how come I could stop people from smoking packs of cigarettes a day? They had no cravings and they had no withdrawal from nicotine. It was like they never smoked. So, what I want to share with you, I don't know the exact degree, but I do know that many of the things that we think are biologically addictive, that is a cultural illusion that we have learned, and it is not true, but it is true for us because we believe it's true for us. I want to do, again, being a little repetitive, I want you to go back to episode number 5 and listen to that because there's no point in me rehashing an entire episode when everything is right there in that episode. But I do want to cover a process here, which is also covered in episode number 5. But I want to cover it here because I'm going to lead into it in just a little bit to share with you because there's an aspect of that process. So what happens is whatever habits we have, and if you notice, most of your habits happen in sequence. Let's say you smoke, for example, and you smoke on the way to work, you smoke at 10 o'clock, you smoke at lunch, you smoke at 3 o'clock, you smoke at 5 o'clock, etc. For the most part, you probably have a pattern to your habits. So what happens is the brain, metaphorically speaking, has actually recorded and knows your sequence of habits. So then what happens is the brain knows, let's say you smoke, to keep this simple, you smoke 3 times a day. You smoke in the morning, at lunch, and in the evening. So let's make this really simple. 3 habits, 3 times. 1 habit, 3 times. So what happens is the brain says, okay, we know that she smokes at 9, at noon, and at 6. And again, I'm making all this up. So what happens is like an alarm clock. The brain says, okay, prior to 9 o'clock, I'm going to give her, I need to remind her to get into the habit because, and I'm just dialoguing and making this up as if the brain were talking, the reptilian part of the brain. And the brain would be saying, you know what, my job is her survival. My job is to actually make habits happen in sequence, whatever they are. So therefore, I'm going to make sure that she does the habit. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give her a cue, like a little bit of a nudge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give her an urge prior to the habit having to happen. So if she smokes at 9 a.m., at 8:50, I am going to give her the urge to want the cigarette because when she has the urge, therefore she's going to remember, oh, okay, yeah, I've got this urge here, even though the person's not thinking about it. Oh, I want a cigarette. So what happens is the brain literally is set like on autopilot, the reptilian part of the brain. Then what happens is the cue comes in, and the cue actually creates the urge, and the urge creates the desire. And then what happens is most of us, when we go into the habit cycle, the habit loop, we go right into the habit. Now, where I was of Diet Coke is when I wanted, and this is why it's so hard to break your bad habits. Here's the whole podcast is going to rest on this, is what I call your habit voice, which I talk about in episode number 5, but I'm going to go farther here. So what happens is that voice in your head says, oh, okay, yeah, I feel like a cigarette right now, or I feel like a cookie, or I feel like a Diet Coke, or oh yeah, I feel like playing a game online and wasting time there, or I feel like this, or I feel like that. So what happens is there is this entire strategy on the brain, and then what happens when we want to quit the habit? What happens is our habit voice, actually what happens here is habit voice says, it's like nudging you. Habit voice is like a con person, a con woman, a con man. Notice how I'm actually appealing to both genders because I got emails on that also about that. But habit voice, it's that voice in your mind that says, go ahead, yeah, go ahead. It's okay. Have one more cookie. Go ahead, have one more Diet Coke. Or things like, you know what, you're weak and you shouldn't try to resist a cookie anyway because you're going to fail. Now, here is the power, is that when we learn to dialogue with habit voice, we can destroy a habit very, very quickly if you follow the exact, very simple steps that I give you. And again, for the 4th or 5th or 6th time, go back and listen to episode number 5. What most of us do is we fight the urge. So we have the habit, we have the urge, which is the cue, and then the urge pops up, and then when we want to start a new behavior, what we do is we fight the urge and we try to use willpower. Then we get in a habit battle, have the cigarette, no, have the cigarette, no, have the cigarette, no. Then what happens is the thinking part of the brain loses to the stronger part of the reptilian, which is the reptilian brain. And then what happens, many times we create self-talk about that, and our self-talk many times is, well, there you go. See, I knew that I couldn't quit. I'm going to be a lifelong smoker, whatever. It is so hard. It is so hard. It is so hard to quit. No matter what I do, I can't quit. etc., etc., etc. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to show you in just a moment the sequences, the 4 simple steps. And if you're in the car, you cannot write these down right now. Come back and listen later. And I want you to write these 4 steps down, and I want you to commit them to memory, put them on a 3x5 card, put them in your pocket, but learn this strategy. It will set you free. And I know because it did for me, and I've had many students tell me in my coaching programs, it has set them free also of a lifetime of counterproductive sabotaging habits. Before I go into the 4 steps, the 4 step sequence that you're going to go into, actually it's 5 steps as I think about it, because there's something here that I want to add that will just transform your life when you get this. And as a matter of fact, I asked my students recently, I just finished a group coaching program. We went 15 weeks. And I said, do you guys remember week number 1? What was the most valuable line I told you in the entire program? And they all knew it. And I'm going to share that with you as step number 5 in just a moment. I do want to add one more thing here, and then I'm going to give you the steps. What I want to add is that your habits come from the reptilian part of your brain. But what many of us do is we personalize the habit, meaning we make the habit about us as an entire, being, a human being. We make it our habit, and then we actually, many times we put, quanta and qualification on it. For example, like cookies, like I talked about. We will now if you have a habit of eating a cookie every day or 6 or whatever, what happens is many people make that about them. Oh, I am a person who eats a dozen cookies a day, and that means that I am weak, and that means that I just can't resist sugar, and it's etc. Now, when I started here, and I say it many times in episode number 5, and I'm going to say it here, a habit is just a habit. It is not you, even though your brain is in your body. It is not you doing the behavior. It is your brain. You have to get that, please. It is your brain. So what we do is we personalize it. Now, again, there's subtle distinction there, but I think it's pretty clear what I'm saying is, the cookie, and you have one every day. It's your brain doing it, and then people personalize it and say, oh, I'm so weak, etc. So we want to create that distinction because what I want to start doing right here is, and when you go back and listen to episode number 5, this response will be like, crystal clear to you. It'll make 100% sense, even though I've just covered and highlighted in this episode, it'll be 100% clear to you. What we're going to do, and again, you may want to write this down. Here's what happens. Let me tell you the anatomy of what happens. Is that the habit alarm, which I covered here and in 5, episode number 5, the habit alarm goes off in the brain. Then what happens, which I'm being a little repetitive, but hopefully just stay with me. Then what happens is the urge comes up, which is a compulsion. And then what you literally do is you say, I want, or I feel like I want, or I need, or I'm thinking about having the Diet Coke. Then what happens, because the brain, reptilian part of the brain, really wants you to do that habit, because that part of the brain works from the habit is it's a survival mechanism. So then what's going to happen, that part of the brain called the habit voice is going to pop up, and that voice is going to say, yeah, have the Diet Coke. Here's where most people collapse. Now, and they go into the habit. Here's where you are going to actually split from that and eliminate the habit. I have to be candid here. When I had the Diet Coke habit, seriously, I thought, wow, this stuff's got power over me. This is crazy. Come on. What do they put in this that makes it so addictive? And when I put together in my mind, and I figured this out, and I put this process together, I literally, even though I've said it before, I really want you to understand this, is that I stopped a 20-year habit that I talked to myself about for a good 10 years wanting to quit and thinking that I couldn't quit. I stopped literally with no cravings in a matter of, I don't know, one day, one afternoon. And I even remember the intersection that I was sitting at because part of my habit loop was I would come home from lunch. I work from home, but I go out to lunch every day just to get out of the house. And there's a 7-Eleven on the corner. Now, I wouldn't keep Diet Coke in the house because if I kept it in the house, I would drink it. But I knew if I went to the 7-Eleven on the corner, then I could buy a Diet Coke there, and that would satiate my urge, which was a habit for a Diet Coke. So, all right, so I've covered the 4 steps that your brain goes through. Now, Let me give you the responses, okay? Here's what you want to do. And you can write this down and just use it exactly in the way that I give it to you. Number one, so when the compulsion and the urge comes up, whatever it is and you no longer want it, here's your steps. Number one, write this down. You're going to say to yourself, this is just a habit. It is not me. That's step number one. This is just a habit. It is not me. Because remember, most people personalize the habit, and the habit comes from the brain. Step number one, and I'm going to repeat myself a lot because repetition is the mother of all learning. Step number one, write this down. This is just a habit. It's not me. Okay, that's step number one. Now, you already know you're having an urge. So what you're going to say to yourself next is this. You ready? Here it is. This urge will go away when I dismiss it. This urge will go away when I dismiss it. That's step number two. I'll explain dismiss in just a moment, and I do explain it thoroughly in episode number 5. Step number 3. You're going to say this to yourself. It's just my habit voice. It's not me. It's just my habit voice. It's not me. Next step is this. Are you ready? I choose to dismiss the urge and habit voice now. I'll repeat that. I choose to dismiss the urge and my habit voice now. So obviously, what you're going to do is you're going to dismiss habit voice and you're going to dismiss the urge. As a matter of fact, to make sure that you go back to episode number 5, I'm not even going to explain what dismiss is because I explain it very clearly, the distinction between dismissing something and ignoring it. What most people try to do is they try to ignore the urge, and when they try to ignore the urge gets stronger. So go back and listen to episode number 5 where I clearly actually talk about the distinction between dismissing and ignoring. So what you're going to do is you are going to dismiss the urge and the habit voice now, which you will say to yourself. And then finally, the last step is this. And you will say this. And this literally is metaphorically tattooed on my forehead. It's, to me, the most powerful thing probably. And I say probably. I could pick a handful of things. But to me, this is pure power. And the final thing you're going to say to yourself is this. I move my attention. I move my attention, and that's it. Because see, I don't know if you know how long you've been with me and how many episodes you've listened to, but you are in your life where your attention is. And have you ever noticed that when you want Diet Coke, to give you an example of that, you want a Diet Coke or a cigarette or whatever. Well, your attention's on that. And the more that you keep your attention on that, the more that you want it. But notice, for example, that you're thinking about a Diet Coke. You don't have a Diet Coke, and you're in the car. Then you almost have an accident. Whoa! Now that scared you, and the brain got into action and everything else. You're no longer thinking about a Diet Coke. You no longer even want a Diet Coke. Why? Because your attention is not there. When your attention is somewhere, you are thinking about that thing. And here's what I want to share with you. You can't want something if you are not thinking about it consciously. Meaning once the urge pops up for you, which comes from the reptilian brain, then you start thinking about it. Now you want it because your attention is there. But when you move your attention, then what happens is the brain actually moves to whatever you're focusing on. Now, here's the cement here. Is what will happen is the habit will leave very, very quickly. Literally, by the very next day, I had maybe like a 10% urge for Diet Coke. After that, I've never had another urge since then. Why? Because the reptilian part of the brain, if you could see it dialoguing, and it was dialoguing, it would sound something like this. Well, I gave him an urge for a Diet Coke, and I gave him, I know that he had one every day at 1 o'clock. I gave him the cue. I created the urge. I gave him habit voice, and he dismissed it. And then each time I went through that sequence again to give him all the whole sequence to create the habit, he dismissed it. Therefore, I'm no longer going to actually execute on the habit loop because every time I do, he dismisses it. So what's the point of executing on the habit loop? Now, if you could listen into your reptilian brain, it would sound something like that. So, there's your 5 steps right there. To recap very quickly, write these down. This is just a habit, it's not me. This urge will go away when I dismiss it. It's just my habit voice, it's not me. I choose to dismiss the urge and habit voice now. And then finally, I move my attention. Okay, there you go. So this will complement these 2 episodes, work hand in hand, number 5 and number 45. So write this down, apply it, and send it to support at JimFortin.com, and let us know how this is working for you. I'm guaranteeing you just stick with this and you stay right on script as I've given it to you, and it'll be very, very easy for you to actually transform yourself out of your old counterproductive sabotaging habits. Now, your transformational takeaway that this week is there's a couple of things. Number one is that everything in your life, for the most part, 95%, everything that you do, 95% is a habit. Habits are not personal. They come from the reptilian part of the brain. And your transformational takeaway is obvious, is the 5-step process that I gave you to master, learn that process, work through it in your mind. It also works, I want to point out, for not just physical things, but it also works for, and by the way, I know I'm going to get email on this. People are going to email me about addictions and everything else, but I've seen people use this, and I've used it in hypnotherapy with people that have addictions, and I've watched them move through it very quickly. But what I want to point out is that you can also use this process with habit of thinking, like I'm not good enough, or bad things are going to happen, or whatever it might be for you. Recognize that if you've got a counterproductive thought over and over and over and over again, that is a habit, and you can use this very same process. So your major transformational takeaway is the 5 steps that I just gave you. Okay, the next episode is going to be with Jason. Jason is actually currently enrolled. He's been through one of my transformational program a couple of times, and he's actually enrolled to go through it a couple more times. Jason is an Olympic medalist, and in that episode, he's going to share with you, and I think this will be, I know it's going to be an extremely valuable episode. He's going to share with you how he held himself back for helping people for over a decade because something that was stuck in his mind about that Olympic medal that he won, and something that somebody told him about that Olympic medal. Plain and simple, he was told, even though he was the winner of an Olympic medal, he was told he didn't deserve it. And he believed that some part of him, and he lived for over a decade not helping the amount of people that he could help because he believed something that someone else said to him. So if you've ever been in a place where you believe things, which by the way, most of your life is a belief, and you are trapped in that very same place, even if you don't want to admit it, you're going to love the next episode with Jason on Monday, The Transformational Story. Okay, take care and make it an awesome day today. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. If you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@JimFortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives. Thanks for listening.